Hey guys, welcome back to Ty and some different guys. I'm Ty Franck, and not with me today is Wes Chatham. Unfortunately, Wes ate a bad Twinkie, and he's down for the count. He's sick with, I don't know, what people used to call the stomach flu, but I guess it's just food poisoning. So instead, excuse me, I'm going through puberty, my voice is changing. Instead, I've got Jeremy Benning, the cinematographer for The Expanse, all 6 seasons, and Jay Vieira, our A camera operator, who's been with us. Have you been 5 out of 6 or 4 out of 6?
I've been A camera 5 out of 6, but I was here all 6. I was B camera on the first season.
That's right. Yeah. Because Ange was A camera on the first season, right?
That is correct.
Okay, so today we just want to talk about, in general, the technical details of making The Expanse from a camera perspective. And I wanted to mention that Jeremy, I think, may be the second person The Expanse ever hired. Because when we were developing the show and putting together the crew up in Canada, we hired a director named Terry McDonough, the Mad Irishman. And Terry came in and argued very hard to hire this up-and-coming commercial cinematographer named Jeremy Benning. Said that this guy had this really unique visual style. Terry was a huge fan of his and thought he would be great on the show. So, like, you were Terry's first hire for the show.
I guess, yeah, that's true. I mean, it's actually funny that it seems a long time ago, but it also doesn't seem that long ago. But I remember the very first interview that we had, and I'd never met Terry before. I didn't know him from a hole in the ground. I mean, I knew his work. I obviously he'd done Breaking Bad at the time, and so his work was known to me, but I didn't know him personally. So when I went into that meeting, he'd already kind of seen my work, and I remember them saying, like, we're looking for someone outside of television, that they wanted to look outside the box. And from what I understand from what Terry was saying is that I ticked the boxes of the things that they were looking for. And even though I hadn't done long form episodic television at that point, it was something I was very interested in getting into because it was sort of the beginning of, I think House of Cards had just come out. So it was kind of that new era of big television in that way, long story arcs and, feature film level kind of production values. I remember thinking, wow, that's a great world to be part of. This is a whole new kind of era of content. And then Expanse came along right around that time. So when I met Terry, I was kind of amazed that he had seen my work and just thought that I was the guy that fit the boxes that he was looking for. All the experience that I'd had with documentaries and different indie level projects are what attracted him, from what I could tell from our first meeting.
Yeah. He argued quite strongly in favor of getting you, because I know initially, he's like, we should hire this guy to be the cinematographer, and I think initially the studio was like, who?
I actually remember Jeremy giving me a shout afterwards, and he's like, I just got this call about working on this TV series, The Expanse. He's like, I don't know if they've called the right Jeremy Benning. He's like, I don't know if they have the right guy.
Well, Terry was a fan, and he argued hard, and I'm glad he did. Obviously, you've been with the show all 6 seasons. The way the show looks is your brainchild. I mean, obviously, you work with directors, but the sort of the camera work and the look of the show and the lighting of the show, that's all you, and it has been since day one. So I'm glad he won that argument. So you brought Jay on. Jay was one of your hires, Jeremy. And tell us a little bit about the association of the two of you, because I know you guys go way back.
Well, I guess at that point, Jay and I had been working together for several years already. I mean, I had come from a Steadicam operator background. As I was coming up as a cinematographer, that's something I also had done. Jay and I connected when he was looking to get into doing Steadicam work. So I started kind of teaching Jay what I knew. And then eventually he kind of went off on his own and started doing it and was, became very good at it. And we started working together as on the various projects that I was doing. Jay would come out as my operator. And, because I had basically passed along all the things that I knew and my kind of methods of working, I'd never really had an opportunity to work with someone where I could pass off the Steadicam sort of torch and have that trust level, because I'd done it myself for so long. And it was such a integral part of what I did that it made sense that Jay would be the person that I would, bring on to the things that I was doing at the time, because we had that working relationship. And when Expanse came along, it was the natural thing, because at that point I was going into an environment where I didn't really know anybody else. And, this was, I wasn't involved with that long format world in Toronto at the time. And, Manny, our producer, in the very beginning, he wanted to support me as best he could. And I didn't know Manny at the time either. So he was suggesting all the people that should be part of the core team. which were all amazing suggestions of like the A-list people in town. And the only person that I really knew that I could bring to the table was Jay. And I knew I had that understanding with him, and also because Terry had such a specific vision for how he wanted the camera to move, and he was talking about the Movi and using gimbal technology, which at the time was very new. Jay and I had started using that already at that point, and I knew, well, this show is going to be so much about the movement and the zero gravity stuff, and specific kinds of shots where the camera wants to go through things and over things, and in these really specific environments that will be challenging to move the camera in other ways, that it made sense that Jay would be the person that I would bring on to that. And it was great because him and Angelo had not worked together before either, and they had a great relationship that developed as well, because they both had their strengths, and Jay being sort of the newcomer to that world at the time, he brought all these skill sets that were really catered to the show, that paired well with Angelo's.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up, because I did want to talk about that, the way that the style of our show, the way that we have that sort of floaty camera move, the way that we change height dramatically in a single shot, sort of affected the technology that we used on the show, and we were using some new stuff. So I wanted to ask Jay about that. So I obviously we used the Movi right from season 1, and then at some point, when did we switch to the Ronin? Was that in like season 3 or 4? We started using the Ronin.
Yeah, I believe it was season 3. I think we went into season 2 with the Movi as well, and then we were hearing words of the new Ronin coming out with their new model, and I think Jeremy, you got in touch with them and said, hey, how do we get our hands on one of these? We've been working with the Movi. We really want to try out your technology. It looks like it could be work really well for our show. And then, yeah, I mean, I know you got in touch with guys at DJI, Jeremy, and somehow got our hands on one of those. I believe it was season 3. And yeah, we kind of adapted some bits to work the way we had been working with the Movi. And we even had a bit of a relationship with the DJI guys, and kind of showed them how we were working with it, and they obviously supported us as well in that.
So Jay, can you explain to our audience of Expanse fans who are not cinematographers and camera people what exactly those two things are, and how we use them in the show?
Well, they're both stabilized gimbals. They can both they're small enough to be carried, but strong enough to put a full-size camera package on it.
And so when you say stabilized gimbal, what you're talking about is a device that allows the camera to move in multiple directions inside of another piece of hardware, right?
That is correct, yeah.
Okay.
So in a way that I'd be able to actually carry the camera around, and you wouldn't feel it like a handheld shake. It would actually stabilize a lot of the movement of my body shaking the camera. It would all of a sudden completely solid.
Yeah, I want to, just as an example for the people listening, I want to mention maybe one of the most dramatic uses of that technology we did, which was in season 5, which is where we actually had a crane shot from hundreds of feet in the air using one of those rigs that came all the way down to the ground, and then you physically grabbed the rig once the camera had come down and began using it like a handheld camera from that point.
That is correct.
It's that kind of shot. Correct me if I'm wrong, because I'm not obviously a cinematographer or a camera person. That kind of shot is only possible with that sort of technology, right?
Yes, completely. That's exactly it. I mean, to be able to have a stabilized handheld rig that we were able to send, was it 200 feet, I think, up in the air, Jer? And
yeah, it was 200 feet.
Bring it down nice and smoothly, have somebody on a set of wheels to remotely operate the camera, continuously framing in our friend Wes, and coming all the way down and bringing him right up into like a nice close up. And then that's my timing, was literally watching the gimbal coming down to me and trying to smoothly catch it and bring it back, and this time it right as Wes is coming towards me, and then start leading him backwards. Right. And then, yeah, it's like I have to catch it smoothly, but again, with the help of a stabilized gimbal, it helps correct any of that shake that I would have normally had if just grabbing a normal camera from a rig like that, and then continuing a shot to make it look like a oneer leading somebody all the way back from a helicopter shot almost. Which
winds up being amazing in the show, because it absolutely looks like that. Yeah. I mean, obviously there's a hidden cut in there, but it feels like we go straight from a helicopter to a crane to handheld, and it's a single shot, which I'm sure. I mean, how many years ago would that have been impossible? It doesn't seem like that long ago that would have been an absolutely impossible shot.
Well, I remember, I mean, early on, like when Terry actually was the one who suggested that he wanted, in the first interview I had with the team, he said, I want to use this new gimbal technology, which Jay and I had just used on a feature film we had just done that year. This is 2014. So we were familiar with it. And I remember Terry saying, I want to shoot the whole show like this. And I remember thinking okay, this is really cool. But I also thought this is kind of daring because no one had done this before. And he's like, I want to shoot the whole thing this way. So at the time, the technology was very infant. The Movi was there was Movi and Ronin. It was their early models. And there was one other company from Germany called Maxima, I think. And we said, let's bring all these pieces of gear to Toronto and let's test them all. And let's pick what the right one is. And I told everyone on the team, I said, we need to test this really extensively and pick the right one. And everyone has to kind of sign on to the notion that this is kind of prototype level technology. Because even FreeFly, the Movi people, they gave us a prototype of their newer model of the Movi at the time. So we went to our local camera house supplier at Sim, and we brought all these pieces of gear together, these 3 different systems, and we set up this obstacle course video of basically to put these 3 things through their paces. So we had down a hallway, we had a piece of card with a hole. We passed the camera through the hole, lower it on a rope, somebody else grabs it. We did a whole kind of long Rube Goldberg kind of shot to see which one was the best and which one we could use the best. And Jay was there, Angelo was there. We were all did this. Even Terry was there watching these tests, and that's how we landed on the Movi at the time. But literally, that was the first time any of us had done anything like that. And then afterwards, it's okay, now this is going to be our main tool, So because I remember Terry saying I want to have the camera feel like it's like a spirit that could float anywhere in these environments, because it has to be 0G, it has to be able to go through things, and it has to be like a spirit. And he felt that Steadicam wasn't really the right tool because it didn't feel like zero gravity to him, and so that's kind of what we started with, and from there it evolved, and it was up, like you say, Ty. Before that wasn't possible.
Yeah, I want to also, because keep in mind we're talking to people who don't know the tech behind this, which I explain. Jason brought up the wheels. I want to talk about that because so what we're actually talking about is a camera rig that requires 2 operators. You have a person who's physically carrying what you're calling the gimbal around on some sort of rig that stabilizes and allows it to move, but another operator has remote control wheels that they're turning that actually turn the camera inside of that rig. Which I know that's, there's other, when you're using a crane, it's the same kind of thing. You put a camera on the end of a crane and there's somebody with wheels to, move the camera. So that's not radically new technology, but the rig we're talking about here is something that Jay can carry around, or another operator can carry around on whatever sort of physical rig he's got attached to his body, and that a different operator can do the fine movement of the camera, which allows us to do some of the really crazy stuff we've done. The one I'm thinking of, I don't remember which season it was in, but I remember we did a shot where, Jay, you had what do you call the rig where the camera's sort of hanging off the ropes in front of you?
It's the Walter Clausen slingshot.
The slingshot, right. So you had the slingshot, and basically at that point you've got a couple of almost like bungee cords hanging in front of you, and the camera rig is hanging on those bungee cords. And then you've got 2 sticks that you can move around and extend with. And so you basically, what you've got is a floating camera on the end of some sticks, and somebody else has got wheels that they can turn that make the camera turn and look wherever it is. And I remember we used that. There was a shot on the Rocinante on the ops deck where you started out with the camera down one of the stairwells on a lower deck. And in the course of a single shot, you had the camera come up that stairwell, move through the operations deck, and then float up the stairwell to the flight deck where Alex would sit in a single move. And it's just you with these sticks, moving the camera around on these long sticks, and, the operator with the wheels, getting the shots that we want. And I remember watching that happen and thinking, if you didn't have that, how would you do that? I mean, obviously you'd probably have to go to a crane, right? Or a jib, right? And even then, I don't know how you get that down that first stairwell to even start that shot and have it come out and then go up.
Yeah. I mean, I think we were always trying to think outside the box once we had this tool, and knowing the limitations of some of our sets and how they're not very spacious, and to get a crane into some of these sets is actually quite difficult. So once we had the ability to have a gimbal that I could carry, and we adapted it with these sticks that I was able to actually turn out to like monopods, so extend them, I don't even know, probably like 8 feet away from my body, and using the bungees that they're attached to, push them straight down past the ground, below my feet, like you said, into a lower level, and follow somebody up a set of stairs onto one level, and then continue up another flight up to the flight deck. And I mean, I have to say, it's not easy. It was constantly adapting, even for myself, learning this, because it was all very new. The slingshot was new. It was designed for these new gimbals. So I was one of the early adopters of figuring out how we're going to use this, what are the limitations, what I can do. And I mean, there was definitely a physicality aspect to picking that camera up and getting it up to close to 10 feet up in the air.
Yeah, because there's about a 20-foot vertical change in that shot, going from down the lower deck through and then up, so that's 20 feet that you're moving this thing on the end of sticks. I wanted to talk about that, because how much does that rig weigh?
I feel like every season it gets a little heavier. The guys keep wanting to add something to it. But I would probably say it's in around the 35 pound weight.
Okay, so you've got a 35-pound weight that you're holding up in the air for the duration of the shot on the end of a stick.
Yep. 2 sticks.
With bungee cords.
That feels like there is a physicality to being a cameraman that people are probably not aware of. that like, most people are not going to be able to do that and hold that steady for the duration of the shot without like your arms starting to shake, holding that thing up in the air. It's not something I would have thought about, that like, to do that job, to be a camera operator, you got to have some guns on you.
Yeah, sometimes. I mean, definitely in that situation. And I think I was definitely a little bit lucky in figuring that out, because originally when that slingshot device was designed, it was to get it from probably about your feet level up to head height, and be able to hold it comfortably there. And then we just kept pushing it. It was like, this was the show that was like, hey, can you get a little higher? Actually, can you see how high can you get it? And I was like, well, let's see, And then, it was learning how to move my body with this rig and adapt to be able to get in one shot right from below my feet all the way to about 10 feet up in the air.
Another example of a shot that you couldn't have done any other way. There's a few times we've done this because of the way that device is built. You don't necessarily have to always have the camera right in front of you, so. And because there's somebody else operating on the wheels, which was either me or Angelo or Kevin, Jay could actually put the camera off to one side or around him and not have to worry about having the camera always in front. So he could put his body in places to kind of get around obstacles. And so you could kind of dance the camera around things. And there's a shot on the Rossi, I think it's from season 2 or 3. It's where they're getting suited up. We're in silent running mode, and the camera kind of comes in to the space. It's wide, and you see Amos putting his helmet down, sitting in the chair, and the camera kind of goes right around his face and then past him and then across to where Holden's sitting, and we go up to Holden, and Holden lets go of his coffee cup and it floats. And that's all one shot. And you see the camera go right around in front of Wes. And Jay did that with the slingshot and the Ronin to get around that space. And he wasn't right behind the camera. He was kind of walking off to the side and kind of almost like a bullfighter, like swinging the camera around in front of Wes. And that, we couldn't have done that any other way. A crane wouldn't have done that because it had to make a left-hand turn.
Yeah. And I wanted to say that as somebody who didn't work in film before the show started and has now, I guess, worked in film for 6 or 7 years, the things that I learned was, one of the interesting things to me was the sort of the choreography. When you're blocking a scene, it's not just the actors. Directors telling the actors where to stand and what to do, but there's this whole other level, this technical level, where you, Jeremy, as the cinematographer, and the camera operators are trying to figure out how to get the camera to do the thing that it needs to do. And there's a ton of rehearsal for that too. I remember watching Jay, like, doing the same move over and over and over again until he figured it out and got it smooth and knew where he needed to be and where to step. And it's a really complicated sort of physical problem to figure out. And I started to understand why a really good operator is a rare thing and is a valuable thing on a show, that like not everybody can do that and have that sort of physical control. It's a much more sort of and Jay used to be a gymnast, right?
That is correct.
I was just going to say it's a much more physical sort of gymnastic thing to do that, where you're trying to replicate the same exact move at the same exact speed over and over and over again. And even little things like knowing where you're going to put your foot become like an issue, like, you know, because we have a lot of level changes on our show, and knowing that as you come around, you're going to need to put your left foot up on that higher level so that you can slide up onto the next thing becomes like a rehearsal issue that you got to do over and over and over again. And this is stuff I learned that I didn't know before working on a show. Like I obviously watched a million movies. I never realized the sort of physical and technical skill combination that goes into the cinematography work in a show like that. Yeah.
To that fact, actually, I don't know. I think it's part of my gymnastics background was you would actually a lot of time, like you said, see me walking around the set, and I would, without carrying a camera or anything, I'd be walking through and like sticking my hands out just as if I was holding it to mentally visualize all the places I was going to be stepping, because once I'm holding the rig, I don't want to be paying attention to my feet. I don't want to be I need to be focusing on the shots so that I can, you know, make it as smooth as possible, hide the camera movement, you know, make it as seamless as you can.
Well, I wanted to make a comment that leads me to my next question. The thing with learning all of that is you have to learn all of that, and then while you're shooting, be prepared for a director to say, hey, can you do that same exact thing, but 15% faster? Because that is a common directorial note. I've like watched like these incredibly rehearsed camera moves that you guys have spent hours figuring out, and you're doing it. And then just, you know, some director will be sitting there going, hey, you know, that looked great. Can we do it 15% faster? And I'm like, what even is that? Like,
how do you judge 15% as well?
Exactly. Do you just kind of go a little faster and hope they don't, like, you know, have a calculator and they figure out, hey, that was only 12%. I mean, what do you do? At that point, you're just kind of like, all right, I'll just go a little faster, I guess.
You do. You go a little faster, and you know, sometimes it's the limitations of the equipment itself. And you're like, okay, if I go too fast, there's no way either the second operator is going to be able to like back pan to keep up with my speed. So it's like, you know, just working with the collaboration of the equipment and other people of figuring out what that speed is. And sometimes, like, I know one of our producers, Lewin, always makes a joke about me being the actor's dance partner, but it really does feel like that, because there's so many times that I have to then relay. The director will sometimes come to me and say, hey, go 15% faster, but the actors might not know. So I have to then go, hey, dance partner, I said, I'm going to be moving a little quicker. Just be ready to sometimes, you know, do one of these to dodge the camera, or be ready that I'm going to come onto you a little quicker.
Well, that's actually a good point, because we've been involved in the show for so long, we've obviously developed a pretty close relationship with the cast. You know, there's a trust factor there, and a lot of I think what leads to like some of the great performances in the show is the fact that, you know, Jay or Kevin, but often it's, you know, Jay in these complicated shots, because he's the one doing these sorts of shots. The cast have that relationship with Jay, and there's a discussion you can see as we're planning the shot and working it out, that they're actually working it through together, because it has to be calculated, like, you know, okay, I'm going to go this way, and then the camera goes here, and then you have to kind of duck out of the way at this moment. Yeah. And I'm going to go a little faster here. Like, all that discussion, that really, over the seasons, you know, as the challenges got greater and, you know, the story got bigger, that relationship with the cast, it was really, you know, crucial that we had that trust factor, and that we all knew each other. And, you know, we've done this before. We have that challenge in the past that, you know, Jay is the closest person to the cast in that way. He's kind of like the choreographer working with them directly.
Yeah. And I think probably a lot of people don't realize how close that relationship does become between camera operator and cast. And I think after a while, the cast realizes the camera operator's job is to make them look good. So you get a sort of symbiotic relationship there, where they want to, you know, work with the camera operator because their job is to make everybody look cool. So so thanks for all the technical stuff, but I wanted to talk some lighthearted stuff, because that whole, hey, can you go 15% faster thing the thing you learn when you spend a lot of time on set is there's a lot of chaotic stuff going on, and some of it is rehearsed. You try to rehearse as much as possible, but some of it is sort of improvised. Directors go, hey, what would be great is if we could do this. And I was curious, Jeremy, and Jay too, if you have one, what is the most ridiculous thing a director has asked you to do on our show that you were not prepared for, and why was it Breck?
I was going to say Breck. It's got to be Breck.
Yeah. Well, I mean, every time we've had one of these big opening sequence kind of shots, because Breck and I are often paired together, or always are paired together to do like the big opening things. I mean, the Baltimore shot is one example of that, but probably maybe the sequence of Naomi jumping from the Chetzemoka, like those shots are, yes, we talk about them and we spend a lot of time in prep, like working them through, but then on the day there's always that, okay, we planned the heck out of this thing, but then we actually get into the shooting of it, and there's always that one extra thing that we need to do or Breck asked for, that it's like it's already hard enough as it is right now, and now we're going to have to add one other layer of challenge to it. And of course we all want to make it work, but sometimes I have to be like, I'm not sure if I can actually do that. And then sometimes, most of the time, we figure out how to do it, but that shot of her jumping out of the Chetzemoka, that was a whole multi-layered sequence, because often we shoot things where to make the whole sequence, we're actually shooting it in a bunch of little pieces to connect them all together in visual effects. And that sequence ends up with her on a turntable rotating around. That's basically where the camera's like right inside her helmet, and she's tumbling and the sun is spinning around her, and we're right in her face with the camera. And she's actually on a turntable rotating around with another light source that's going like this to be the sun. And Breck was sort of asking for like, well, can we push in? Can we, those were like little extra things that we're already trying to get this choreography right of the spinning sun and her on the turntable. And the timing has to be such that she has to land it a certain way where the sun is in just the right spot before Bobby grabs her, that we're all working to this timing. And if you change one thing in that, the ripple effect is everything has to kind of be reworked. And, Breck is such a perfectionist and has such a vision for what it needs to be that often he'll be watching the whole thing and be like, okay, it's all working, but now we need to add one extra little thing. And then we all have to kind of work backwards to figure out how do you make that one extra thing fit into this big puzzle. And that shot was an example of that, where he realized that the timing of the rotation was going to have to change. And everyone, the grips, all of us, I mean, Jay was with the camera, we all had to figure out, okay, how do we work out this timing of where we land to have the sun in just the right place? And so there's like 20 people who have to now all calculate their new number one position and their timing, like the 15% faster thing, plus a new start position and a new end position, and you got to push in and all that. So that was an example of like curveball thrown in there, but we made it work in the end. But I understand when Breck is in that moment, he realizes that that's what the shot has to be, and then we all kind of try and figure out how do we get it to be that thing when he wants.
Yeah,
as quick as possible.
It is
and as quick as possible.
It's a weird combination of incredible planning, incredible rehearsal, and last minute improvisation. Like everything seems to be that combination of things. Because I know how much time we spend in prep and how much time we spend in rehearsals and all the tech walkthroughs and everything to try to figure it all out ahead of time. And I guarantee all of that stuff is going to go out the window the second we actually start shooting, because the director or somebody's going to go, hey, what if we, and everything just, now it becomes a mad scramble to try to figure out how to do the thing that somebody just said, hey, what if we.
But if you hadn't done all that planning, if you hadn't spent that time planning, then at least like when it changes, you can adapt more quickly because you have done all that planning, that if it does change, the change of plans actually is easier.
Yeah, for sure. And trust me, I've thrown my share of monkey wrenches. We're all guilty of it. I remember doing a walkthrough with Jeff and on one of Jeff's episodes, and we were looking at the set that the production designer had picked for this certain sequence. We got there, and the production designer and Jeff had already talked about that. They already talked about that set, but when we got there, I'm the producer on that episode. I go, that's not going to work. That set is wrong. We cannot use that. And now I have just thrown a gigantic monkey wrench in this thing because now production is scrambling to build a different set. Like, I'm right. That set would not have worked. We could not have used it. But it is that feeling of shit. Like, we've already put all this planning into it. And now you walk in here and go, no, we're not going to do that. We're going to do this completely other thing. So I'm just as guilty of it as anybody else is. I'm not trying to, throw any mud on Breck here. I think I think everybody's done it, but
Yeah, it's part of the
Well,
process.
and it's all for the ultimate goal of perfection. I think we all want this show to be as great as it possibly can and as real as it possibly can.
yeah.
So I think, with that in mind, we all strive for it. As soon as that change happens, we're like, okay, let's go. We can do this. Let's all put our heads together and make it, because we wanted to make it as great as possible.
I think all of this stuff is a sort of tension between the technical limitations. As an operator, Jay, you're dealing with the technical limitations of what things can do, right? There's a limit to the flexibility of just the objects.
Of course, yeah.
The creative stuff, like what you're doing, Jeremy, you're trying to get like and you're working with the directors to try to get like the perfect shot for the thing, what the director wants, and then what I want as the writer and producer of an episode. There's just always this tension between all those things, and the best version of this is that little tiny piece in the middle where all the sort of the Venn diagram overlaps, and the creative and the technical and the writing and the directing all sort of there's that one little piece that overlaps, and if we can get that moment, that becomes the best shot in the show. There's
Sure.
a lot of pushing and pulling all the time, and I wasn't prepared for that. I got to say, when I came in, that like there's just always kind of a little tension all the time. Everybody wants the same thing, but everybody has a slightly different approach on how to get it.
Well, and it's time. I mean, it comes down to time. The time thing is the tension creator,
Yeah.
because at the end of the day, we only have so many hours that we're budgeted to shoot, and that's our limitation. We have to work within that
Yeah.
box. And we've got, the show has grand ambitions of what we want to create, and we have to do it within a certain time frame. So you have to plan as much as you can to know that we only have this many hours or days to get this certain sequence, and we have to stick to that schedule. And that's always our challenge of like do the best thing we can in the time that we have available to us.
Yeah, 100%. And I think that's because you guys both worked in features, right? That's especially true in television. When Daniel and I came on board in season 1, Narain, our showrunner, one of the things he made very clear early on is he said, because he was talking to Mark and Hawk, who are EPs and who were the guys who developed the show, who were both feature guys. And Narain kept saying, guys, you have to be prepared for the pace of this. This is not a feature. This is TV. The pace is very different. And I have become more familiar with working on the feature side. I've seen some stuff on the feature side now. And watching them spend an entire day to shoot a quarter of a page feels so like it's like luxurious. It's like, you're just sitting in a hot bath all day, right? Whereas with us, if there's days where we shoot 7-8 pages in a day. And so you go in, you've got an hour and a half to get that sequence done. And there just isn't any more time for that. Like if we don't get it in an hour and a half, we're not getting it. And we have to move on to something else. That pace is it's a dramatic difference in television. Yeah. So I assume for you guys, I got to ask you guys, as guys who work on that side, do you prefer the sort of languid pace of features, or do you like the high energy, fast pace of TV? I mean, which do you prefer?
I'll let you answer, Jer.
I mean, they both have their pros and cons. I mean, the thing about a feature environment is that you're creating one thing, you have a certain amount of prep time, and you have this maybe more grand schedule in order to accomplish it, but you don't necessarily have the infrastructure of the machine to create that world. So there are inherent challenges with that, because in our world, in the television world, if you're working on a show that has many episodes, you're up front with the prep, you're creating all this infrastructure and the sets and everything to then create multiple episodes over the course of, say, several months, that you create this machine that you have that can produce those results more efficiently in some ways. You may have less time on the day to shoot it, but you may have more resources overall to actually create this bigger thing. That in a feature, you only have the time to create this one thing, and you don't have necessarily the machine all tuned up and there to make that happen easier. So the plus side is you have more time to actually create it on the day, but you also have a team that's only together for a shorter period of time to make this one thing that's like an hour and a half long project, but that's all you're there to do. Whereas in our world, we're making 10 hours of something over like maybe 3 times the amount of time. So there's pros and cons. Like it is nice to have that more time on the feature side, but the trade-off is you don't necessarily have the machine there that's all tuned up to create that, because it's all just been put together for that one project.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And to that exact point is like, I think everybody on a TV series is wired to try to create and flow really well and like on the spot, that we're constantly in that mode all day long, that there's a bit of enjoyment actually to that. It's like, when you get that last minute, like, hey, we need to do this, and you pull it off, you're like, oh man, how good does that feel? And but you do, at the end of the day, you're like, oh God, why couldn't we have a little more time, or do a couple pages less a day, to be under that constant stress sometimes is wearing.
Or even like to have like one or two more takes.
Exactly.
We've done 4 or 5 takes, and they're all, 2 of them are pretty good, and it's like sometimes you have to just accept that we know we're going to cut the shot up, but you really want to make it as good as possible. So if the editor wants to use the whole thing, you could, but you have to kind of accept that there's one little part of the shot that maybe isn't perfect in our mind, but you have to understand the context of how it's going to get used. So you go, okay, fine, we've got it, we've totally got it. But to have that one more take to reset and do it one more time, sometimes you just don't have that luxury.
Yeah, and especially when so many things have to go right for everybody to be happy with the take. Because for the audience, I often in the early days I would sit in Jeremy's tent, looking at his monitors and listening to Jeremy talk to the crew, because I liked just being close to the technical piece, because it was a piece I didn't understand, and getting to hang out with Jeremy, I got to hear a lot of tech talk and start absorbing how a show is actually made. But I also became very familiar with how many things have to go right, because it's not just the camera went the right direction, the actors said the right lines, all of that stuff can be true. And that's a lot of things. That's a lot of moving parts to get, all of that. But sitting behind Jeremy, the director would call back, hey, Jer, are you okay with that one? And Jeremy would go, there was a little buzz at the end of the shot. And it can be just a little thing, like the focus was just slightly off for a few seconds at the end of the shot, and we're redoing it. And that's just one thing out of 100 things. And that means the shot wasn't right. And with so many moving parts, I absolutely understand what you're talking about. That, like, I wish we could get one more of those, because, of the 100 things that needed to go right, 99 of them are good and one wasn't. Can we get away with that? Yeah, we probably can. We can get away with that. But
yeah, it's constantly a judgment call thing of, you're always kind of like, you have to kind of take it into context of like, okay, the 1 or 2 things we weren't happy with, does it really, is it really going to be a problem later? And that's, everyone has to kind of discuss and go, yeah, you know what, we're okay with it. That's not a problem. We're going to cut around that or whatever.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I want to change track just a little bit here, because we've been talking a lot of camera stuff, which is obviously incredibly important on the show. But probably a lot of people don't realize that as the cinematographer, you're also in charge of all the lighting for the show. And for our show especially, that was a pretty unique challenge, because one of the things that you brought to the table, and we've done for 6 years now, is to have as much of the lighting as possible be in the set. Can you talk a little bit about how you designed that and the thought process behind that?
I mean, that goes back to the very first discussions I had in the very first interview I had, because once I'd seen the kind of the first couple scripts and understood what the sort of demands of the world were going to be, these sort of completely 360 environments that are, with ceilings and you're completely enclosed, there's no opportunity to put like movie lights above the set where there's no ceiling. And the traditional way of doing things is we're going to see everything. We're going to look up, we're going to see the ceiling. So then I realized it all has to be built in. Everything has to be in the set, because we're going to look in every direction, even the ceiling. So the lighting has to be integrated completely, and it all has to be totally controllable, because every part of the set has to be adjustable, it has to change color. You have to be able to brighten and darken certain areas of the set depending on where the actors go, all on the fly. So then that basically created the necessity of, we have to work with the production designers and the set designers to make sure that as the sets are being created, we're building everything in, so that my team, the rigging, lighting team, is putting in that lighting into the set as it's being built, and it's being designed for those things to be in the set. So where there's, openings need to be put into the ceilings, or things need to be built into the floor, that's being incorporated into the design in a way that makes sense, because depending on the world that we're in, like the belters versus, the Martian technology, all those things have different sort of design philosophies because of how those ships are used. So it's like take that philosophy and then apply it to the design and make sure that it actually everything fits into it in a pre-lit, built-in way. And that often meant actually making our own lighting stuff. So we had an entire sort of fabrication team that their job was literally just making LED ribbon and fixtures and lighting kind of elements that could be installed into the set that were part of the environment, so that when you see them on camera, they look like they're part of the set. And they are part of the set, but they're also lighting the set and they're lighting the actors' faces, you know, so we're not, again, on the day with our time schedule, we can turn around and look in different directions for each shot and adjust the lighting as quickly as possible. Maybe only bring in one or two little lights that we just kind of add for the eyes or to fill in the face, but 90% of what you're seeing in the set is actually part of the set.
Yeah, and I didn't know it at the time, but that's actually quite unusual to light a show that way, to have all of the things be part of the set, and it creates, I think creates a very unique look for our show.
I think it makes it more real too, because that's what Terry and you know even you guys, when in the beginning when we were talking about, you know, to you and Daniel and talking about the world, it was very much about, think of these as utilitarian spaces. This is like, you know, an oil rig in the middle of the ocean. This is where people live and work, and it's like it has to look and feel real. Like the people really could be working and living in these spaces. So how do you don't want to over glamorize it and make it feel like a movie set where it's like overly polished in that way. It has to still feel real. So I thought that was a really unique challenge, because I'd never seen anything like that done before, and I'd never done anything like that before. And it's funny because since then, in the time that's passed since we started, other shows are now doing that because the technology has progressed. But I know at the time we were definitely one of the first to kind of go to that level of really committing to, like, we're building everything in.
Yeah, I'm seeing it more now when I'm watching shows. I'm seeing, like, I've learned to recognize when that's what's been used when I'm watching shows, and I'm seeing a lot more of it. But I think our show looked so different when it started. I think it was a really unusual way of sort of setting everything up, and I think it's part of the visual style that makes our show unique. Is that kind of stuff. I mean, and it's a combination of this. So it's your unique lighting, but it's also, you know, we're talking about with Jay, the technology we use to move the cameras around and sort of do all these really interesting camera moves. And I think most people watching a show don't think about that. They don't go, oh, that was a weird camera move, I wonder how they did that. Most people don't think about it, but it does create sort of an air of uniqueness to the visuals of the show that even people who don't think about the tech side of this sense that something different is happening, you know, something unique is happening.
Yeah.
Part of the reason for you guys listening, part of the reason we wanted to bring Jeremy on is most people, I think, don't think about cinematographers when they're watching shows, but I think for our show, what you have done as the cinematographer in the way you've used the camera technology to create this unique visual style, and the way you've used lighting to create a very unique lighting style from day one, I think a huge part of the uniqueness of the show is your work. And I wanted people to be aware of that fact, that when you look at The Expanse, a big part of what you're looking at a world Daniel and I created, and you're looking at some stories that Naren Shankar supervised, but the look of the show is Jeremy. And obviously you worked with Terry at the beginning on sort of setting that look and feel, but you've been the shepherd of this ever since. So, you know, I just want everybody to know that. Be thankful to Jeremy for the way the show looks, because that's what he did.
Definitely.
Well, and to tie into that, you saying that is also, you know, and to, you know, Jay's involvement and his contribution to it, as well as my thinking as we're creating each new set, is also knowing that, you know, often we'll build a set. Like when we designed the Rossi, we didn't know at the time, I had no idea that we're going to be in the set for 6 years now. Like, you know, you don't sometimes realize the kind of I guess the gravity of what you're creating, that we're going to now have to live in this environment and think of every possible permutation of how this might get shot over the next like 5 seasons. Like I didn't know that at the time when we designed that set, but I am trying to think of how many ways could we possibly shoot this, and to give Jay the freedom to look wherever he needs to look. And the way that Jay and I work together is, you know, we'll watch the blocking with the director and the actors, and Jay and I will both be in the room and watch them working out the blocking. Sometimes we may know in advance what the blocking is going to be, and sometimes we don't, because it's the nature of it. But oftentimes, I mean, the cast on the show is unique in the sense that they often will meet on the weekends and work out the scenes together. And we'll actually sometimes have a sense of like, they're going to do a certain thing in this set. But I like to watch the blocking, figure out kind of generally what it's going to be, but then I'll pass it over to Jay at a certain point and say, what's your take on this, or how do you want to approach this? And know that we've built the lighting in and done everything with the set to not create limitations to what the camera needs to do, so that you can look anywhere. If Jay needs to have the shot where we have to look straight up or down, that can happen. And I'm really consciously trying to design, as we're setting up the shot, to not create those limitations for what Jay needs to do. And because if the actors need to take the camera in a certain way with what Jay's doing, I don't want the set to limit that. I want it to be, you can look wherever you need to. So, I mean, Jay, you might be able to speak to examples of that, because I know that we've done many things like that where, I'll sort of pass the torch to you as we're blocking and then say, okay, then Jay will go off and do his thing for a bit, and he might come back and say, I need to move something or whatever. But that's we try and create that freedom for everybody.
Oh yeah, completely. I mean, I have to say I'm very glad I'm working with you, because you've made it actually so easy so many times to look wherever I want. It's like, watching the blocking, usually we'll have a little conversation. It's like, hey, what do you think if camera starts here and kind of moves around this spot? And then once you start actually working it in, most of the time with the second team, you're walking it around with them and you're like, oh, actually, hang on, that light that we've just added is right on the edge there. Do you think? And I'll have a little conversation with Jeremy. I'm like, Jared, do you think? I feel like I'm going to end up seeing that. Can you give me a little bit of space on it? And most of the time it's like, yeah. Or, there's the odd time that's like, I really need it there. So then I make my small tweaking adjustments, either with my own body or with the marks of the cast members. And we make it work. And I think it is so nice to have that freedom that, for me, I know most of the time I'm always trying to create a shot that we haven't done before. And it's like, what is a new cool angle? Can I do it? And how? So, seeing a blocking, it's like, okay, we haven't started with the lens through this little hole or something, or right over top of this item, and then bring us around so that we're seeing these ships that we know for so many seasons, but almost in a new way.
That's really important because, as Jeremy pointed out, we shoot for 6 years on the Rocinante. Finding new ways to shoot that ship becomes an increasing challenge. And directors hate to use the shot another director used. So they're always,
Sure.
they're always looking for a different way to do it. And we've shot the hell out of that ship, and we keep trying to find new ways to do it. And you got directors coming in with random things like, hey, can we cut a hole in that wall over there? And okay, let's figure out how to do that, so that, we can take this set that we've used a million times and find a slightly different way to show it off.
Yeah. Well, I mean, even to the most recent, it's like, hey, does that piece of floor like above us actually come out? Hey, look at that. It does, we haven't put a camera there before. Let's do that.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I'm watching the cuts of season 6 right now, and I'm still seeing some like, oh, wow, we've never done that one before. We cut a hole in that. It still was happening right up until this last season. So I don't want to, I want to respect you guys' time. I don't want to suck up too much of it. I really appreciate the two of you coming on. Hope the fans dig this. But one last thing I want to ask Jeremy, because it is the running joke of everybody who watches movies. Can we get a final answer to this? What does a grip do?
That's a common question. The grips in general as a team are very important to our craft and our jobs. There's two kinds of sort of descriptions of the grips. There's the dolly grip, which Jay is, it's an integral part to his job. If we're using the dolly or a crane or the jib, the dolly grip is the person that basically helps Jay move the camera. So if the camera's on a dolly,
the dolly is the cart, the wheeled cart that the camera sits on, that Jay can sit on as he's aiming the camera, so that you can have long, steady movements of the camera. I just want to make sure, because not everybody knows what a dolly is.
Mm-hmm. Yes. Yep.
The dolly grip is the person who pushes that cart.
Yeah, and they become another part of the moving of the shot that has to be in sync with the actor's timing and the emotional beats of the scene. So that person is very important to hitting those beats, and working with Jay to get the timing. It's Jay. I mean, that's Jay's right-hand person at that moment. Like they're working together to make those shots. So that's one kind of grip. And then the other division of the grip team are the people that help us with the lighting part. So if we need to put up a big diffusion fabric in the ceiling, or block some light out with fabrics, or rig things to the ceiling of the studio, that's the also the grip department. So they handle all those those things. But before we go, Ty, I did want to mention, because you talked about the wheels earlier, that you also have your third wheel card.
I do. Yeah. I didn't want to bring that up because I didn't want to sound like I was bragging, but I am a camera operator on the Expanse. And in fact, one shot that I worked on where I turned one of the wheels made it into the show. So my third wheel skills were good enough to make the final cut of the show.
And the third wheel,
wheel meaning that
I was going to say, so everybody knows the third wheel is our 0G. It rotates our camera. It'll give you that aspect, which we're doing all the time, and it's not easy. You have to time that third wheel movement with the rest of my camera movement to make sure it all works.
So where this started was, I often on set I like to hang out by where Jeremy is, like I said, because he's got all the technical talk is happening around him, and obviously I was a producer on the show, but I didn't know shit about how you make a TV show, and I wanted to rectify that. I wanted to learn. And so by being near Jeremy, he's sort of the hub, right? Jeremy is the center of all of the action. And so if I was near him, I got to hear everybody. I got to hear the camera operators. I got to hear the gaffer, who is the person in charge of the lighting. I got to hear the grips talking to him. The director would come talk to him. And so just by being in his space, I learned so much about how a TV show is made. But Jeremy, if there's a break in the action, Jeremy and I would chat or whatever. And he's turning the wheels. There were several times Jeremy was operating the wheels. And I would say, hey, you ought to let me in on that. Let me grab one of those wheels. I want to do that. And I was kidding, of course, because obviously I'm not a camera operator and I should not be allowed near anything technical. But there was one shot where we were doing a fairly complicated camera move where Jay was on the movie. And normally we'll put a second camera operator on the wheels, but the second camera operator was doing something else, was on one of the other cameras. And so Jeremy will take over and he'll do the wheels. But there are three wheels. So one wheel tilts the camera one thing, the other wheel tilts the camera the other way. And then that, like you said, that third wheel sort of what they call Dutching the camera, right? Where it's kind of tilts it right and left. And Jeremy's on two of the wheels and has to be doing both of them constantly. So he goes, hey, Ty, come over here. He goes, grab this third wheel. And what I want you to do is I want you to just slowly rock the camera back and forth this way through the shot. I was like, all right, I'll do that. Now, here's where my past comes in handy. I have done nothing but play video games since I was 12 years old. So my eye-hand coordination is pretty good. And if you say, do something at the same speed, a small motor movement at the same speed, and repeat it, boy, you're in my wheelhouse now. I can do that shit, right? And so I was on the wheel, and Jeremy was in there. He goes, hey, that's good. Yeah, that's a good camera move there. I told Narain, and Narain laughed, our showrunner. I said, yeah, I was doing the third wheel on the camera. He's laughed. He's like, yeah, I'm sure you did a great job. The best shot, the one he wound up using in the cut, as he was editing, he's working. He's like, oh yeah, this one's really nice. We're going to use that one. I'm like, dude, that's the one I was operating on. So
that's great.
I was proven correct in the end. That
and you became and throughout the rest of the show, as we were shooting, we always had that comment of like, well, Ty's here. If anything happens, he can take over the third wheel. We're here.
If you need a third wheel backup guy, I was always there.
Right. Yeah.
I like to think of myself as sort of a utility infielder. I can play any position. That definitely that third wheel's in my skill set. Well, thank you very much, guys. Appreciate you guys coming on. I hope the people listening found all of this tech talk fascinating. I know I do. And there's a lot of shit here that we talked about that people watching a show appreciate about a show and have no idea how it happens. So I appreciate you guys coming here and talking about how actually these things are made. And my final question for you guys is, how prepared are you to have the rest of your careers be super disappointing now that the Expanse is done? like, is there a temptation to just leave the business? Because you've already done the best thing. What are you going to do now? What are you going to go make Transformers 7 and be bored out of your skull? Come on.
There's a small element of truth to that, because everything that we do from here on in is going to be compared to Expanse, and it's, the bar is very high.
Yeah. I do want to mention that, like, the show has been going on for so long that when I first met Jay in season 1, he didn't have any kids, and he has like 7 kids now. So like the show has gone on long enough for Jay to turn into like a Mormon family.
Yeah, almost.
Yeah.
Hey, I remember season 1 when I had my first kid. Wes and I joked that we were each gonna have kids every season that we did together.
That's right. Yeah,
We didn't
because
keep up
Wes
with
had
that.
2.
I didn't.
Well,
Neither
you
of us.
passed him at some point. Yeah.
I did. Yeah.
Yeah, Jay beat him.
Yeah. But,
All right,
yeah.
guys. Thank
All
you
right.
so much for coming on. Really appreciate both of you being here. And maybe we'll do this again sometime. We'll talk more when Wes can be here.
I hope you
Yeah,
will.
that'd be great.
For sure.
All right. Thanks, guys.
Thanks, Ty.
All right. Thanks so much, Ty. Take care.